Way, we're going to talk about top of backswing today. I find that for a lot of players, this is a really crucial part of the swing. Now, you'll hear some instructors tell you, be an athlete, swing the club the way you want to swing it. All that matters is impact, which I agree with that to some extent. Like, you want to be athletic, you want to swing the club so that you can make good impact. But a lot of that starts with the top of the backswing position, in my opinion. So I see a lot, just in my honestly, my opinion of that comes from knowing that the average person does not get to spend 6 to 10 hours a day hitting golf balls, right? Like, we all have normal jobs for the most part. Well, my job's teaching you guys, but you guys have normal jobs. So you guys don't get to hit as many golf balls or practice as much as, myself, or even obviously like tour players. So I find that that's why it's kind of important to have a really good, fundamentally sound position at the top of the backswing. How we get there can vary from person to person and how things match up, but what it looks like, what the geometry is of that, of that position of the swing, that's the important stuff. So let's kind of get into that today. So real quick, before I do that, I'm going to grab a couple golf balls, put these over here. I may end up needing a couple. All right. So as we get into the geometry of the backswing, the first thing that I want people to understand is how our shoulders turn to create good angles up there. So the one thing I think gets really misconstrued in golf is we just want to turn in our backswing. Well, when we think of turning, at least in my brain, when I think of just turning, I think of turning as being this level motion, right? Like, it's turning. I played a lot of baseball growing up, so my natural turning motion was always kind of here. As I transitioned over to golf more into like my early teen years, I had to understand that the turn wasn't up here. So like, when I, just like everybody else when they first came to golf, I would want to turn and I would start to stand my shoulders up, and now all of a sudden I've lost posture. I'm not in good position here. I've actually folded my arms to make sure that they don't get too high up here, because that's where I normally want them. And obviously I don't want to be down here. I'm not playing baseball. So when I started to understand that angle, the way that my golf instructor helped me understand it was he said, Jimmy, so I'm a very visual person. And so he would take my club and he would basically say, Jimmy, look, if you have a 90-degree angle here, and from this position, you bent forward into your golf posture, where does that club point? And I said, well, it points somewhere, I don't know, out here. And he goes, okay, cool. So about a foot or so out. He goes, I go, yeah. He goes, so about the length of your grip outside your golf ball. Absolutely. All right. So that's where you want your shoulders to point in your backswing. So a lot of times what I do when I was a little younger, I would take my grip and I just kind of measure it out. And I don't know if you'll be able to see this golf ball in the video, but I'm going to put another golf ball right at the back end of my grip here. Oh, you can see it. Okay, cool. And what I would basically do then is I would sit here and I wouldn't hit a lot of balls. I would just sit there and try and make my lead shoulder point at that outside golf ball. And a lot of times I would start with it with a club up here across my chest. And I would sit here and just start trying to turn and get that shoulder pointing out at that golf ball. A lot of times when I first started that drill, I would notice I would start to turn and I'd be out here. I'd be very level to the ground. Now that club's pointing way over here at like my wall over there. So I had to understand that that angle that I'm turning at was pointing just outside that golf ball. And when I could start to do that, I would put my club down and kind of just replicate that same feeling of trying to get my shoulder to point at that golf ball. And now naturally you can see my arms end up a lot higher that way. If I level out my shoulders right now, you can see my arms are going to follow along. So then what am I going to do naturally? I'm going to lift my arms, and now that sets me up to come way down and across the golf ball. So a lot of times just learning how to turn our bodies at the right angle is a huge step for us in terms of being able to change positions at the top. So the angle we turn at is how we set the vertical motion for our arms. Okay. Now, that before I get that question, because I know the question's coming, does this work with my driver too? Absolutely. Let me grab my driver real quick. So if I grab my driver and I create that same 90-degree angle and I get down into my posture, now you'll notice it's also pointing just outside. So if I was hitting that golf ball, now the ball I was just using to demonstrate, there's another little group of golf balls that you can't see just outside my ball, about a grip out there. And again, that same angle would hold true even with my driver. So it's not going to matter what club you go with there. To me, the only thing that's really changing is the distance from the golf ball. I might, some people might be a little taller with driver. That's fine. Some people might be a little shorter with a wedge. That's fine. But yeah, I think if we can start to try and keep this angle pretty consistent and understand no matter what club I'm hitting, I want my shoulders pointing roughly, a grip length outside that ball. A lot of our backswings will get better really quickly. So with that being the case, let's talk a little bit about the club's orientation on its way up to the top of the backswing as well then. So we understand our shoulders are pointing about, again, a grip length out. Where should our club be pointing then? So this stick on the ground, I'm actually going to shift it for a minute. I'm going to put it right behind the golf ball here. So when we start to envision things, I like to envision that I have a laser out the back of my golf ball, and that's kind of what this thing's going to represent. Now, if I grab my other alignment rod real quick, we're also going to have a laser beam out the bottom of my golf club here, okay? So the way that I'm going to have this work is as my shoulder points at that golf ball outside, I want the laser beam coming out of the bottom of my golf club to point at the laser beam coming out of the back of the golf ball. So it should look somewhere like this, about halfway back. Okay, that would be considered on plane. This would be a pretty decent spot to start learning how to then swing through and start chipping golf balls out at that point. Okay, but when we start looking at a lot of players when they come in for lessons, the most common one that I see is players are trying to swing the club inside out. So they rip the club in, and now all of a sudden you can kind of see right away that this stick and club are pointing, again, kind of way over there. The club head's more behind me. But then with that motion, they then have to start lifting the golf club up, and then they start trying to hinge it back. And so it creates a lot of weird matchups that don't really match up. And then you have to make a ton of compensations in the downswing. So the first thing that I would start understanding about how to get to the top of my backswing is how to create good geometry and good angles, because it makes it easier and it makes me have to create less compensations throughout the motion. Okay. So if I can sit here and kind of practice going back, getting to here, now my only goal is to get this club head to point more or less to my target. And again, you'll notice if I could continue both of these lines from my bottom of my club here and the line coming out of the bottom of my golf ball or the back of my golf ball, those lines in the distance would end up meeting at some point. I don't have the club at the top of the swing too steep, right? Because now all of a sudden you can see that's pointing way over there. If I was too shallow, it'd be the opposite, right? I'd be over here at the top of my backswing. We want those lines somewhat pointing at each other at all times. Okay. So with that being the case, you can start getting into, wrist positions and things like that at the top. A lot of that's going to be based around how you grip the club and things like that. We'll continue to talk about those matchups as we go. But I think with this here, this is just a really solid way, regardless of who you are as a golfer and kind of what level you play at. This just allows us to continue, especially during the cold months, like when I can't get outside a ton. This just allows us to keep building good geometry in the swing. And like I said, from here, if all I had to do was continue to trace that line back, now it just allows me to lengthen that motion out a little bit more. Now, as we start getting into the downswing and things like that later on, this will also be a really good setup for us to use as a reference point. Okay, so hopefully this helps you guys and starts, kind of helping you build some good positions here to work our way to the top of the backswing. As we continue through this week coming up, we'll keep having discussions about what needs to happen, at the top of the swing and how wrist positions all match up with this. If you guys have any questions, feel free to let me know.